a sunny day. There's lots of clouds, big fluffy clouds. It almost started raining, and then it didn't. That's the sound of the wind in the winter time when it's snowing. I can't whistle, but I like how the wind whistles. That little the sky used to be bluebird blue. Very, very blue as the bluest bird in all the world. Chirp, 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 chirp. How many birds do you know the names of? I can name a couple. There's the dark-eyed junco, the robin, the goldfinch. That's a crow in the corner. Did you see that? Did you hear it? Have you ever seen a blue jay? They're quite blue, but not as blue as I thought they'd be. And yet, somehow more blue than I thought they'd be. Have you ever read Warrior Cats? Jay Feather was my favorite. I imagined that he had blue eyes. I think he did. He was blind. I wear glasses, so I really identified with that. Sometimes I like to imagine what life would have been like if I was a caveman. I like to imagine that I would live in a cave with a few other people, and I like to think about how we would help each other and what tools we would use to do our tasks. I like to think that I would spend a lot of time making tools and using tools. What's the last tool you used? A hot glue gun, a screwdriver, a hammer, a drill, a bandsaw, a chisel, a spoon. If you look around, every single thing that you can see, aside from most of the things that you see outside in nature, are tools that human beings have made. When you're sitting inside your house, most of the things that you own are tools that were designed most of the elements in the world are metals. There is a small section of non-metals in the periodic table, but most of the elements are metals. There are certain materials that have properties of both metals and non-metals, and these are called semi-metals or metalloids, and they exhibit properties found both in metals and in non-metals, and we use these things for semiconductors and for lots of other specialized tools. Do you have a favorite metal? There are lots of metals to think of: copper, silver, iron. Technically, lithium is a metal. Magnesium is also a metal. Calcium. Chemically. Sometimes it's hard to think about these things as being metals because they're usually found in things that aren't metal. Lots of metals are involved in materials that are not generally thought of as metals. Metal, chemically, means something a little bit different than metal, like colloquially. Have you ever seen bismuth? Bismuth is kind of an interesting metal. It has very geometric shapes and has all sorts of colors at once. Metals have to be mined out of the earth, like most materials. If you look around your house, lots of things in it are made of metal. In fact, I would bet that maybe less than half, but a large percentage of some of the most important things that you use on a daily basis are made of metal. All of that metal had to be mined out of the earth. Every car you see is made of metal that was mined out of the earth. I suppose it might be possible at this point to synthetically create a metal, but it would be very expensive, and I'm not sure how much metal is synthesized in a lab or in a factory as opposed to just mined out of the earth. Lots of metal is very plentiful, but it's also a limited resource. Metal, in some ways, is a non-renewable resource. We have only so much of it, so when it comes to things like smartphones or cars or appliances, all of that metal, it came from somewhere, and unless it gets melted back down, it stopped being repurposed or used. Then it's pretty wasteful. Did you know that there are only 6 strong acids in the world? 6. Every other acid is technically a weak acid. The 6 strong acids are, I believe, hydroiodic acid, perchloric acid, sulfuric acid, hydrobromic acid, and there are some other